Hello everyone, my name is Wei, I'm from Streamr. In a minute or so, we'll be starting the talk about how to build a data DAO or data union. Welcome to our data DAO presentation. If you cannot hear me well, just let me know. I will try to speak as loud as possible. So I'm from Streamr. We are trying to build a peer-to-peer decentralized network to empower the next generation of data economy and the new paradigm on how we can leverage user data in a more ethical and open manner. Today, agenda is going to be divided into 3 sections. I will give a quick overview on the current state of our data economy, and then I will walk you through some examples of data union framework that are being rolled out so far from our community member side, and then also how a serverless app or data app can be deployed. And at the end, I will show a proposal that we're trying to roll out that's going to become maybe the first data DAO in the open user. Oh, there's an issue with the presentation. Oh, I think that someone plugged the projector by mistake. We'll give a second. So let's go to the initial, let's say, recap of the current state. Well, I'm usually an optimistic guy, so usually I take with a good point of view that project usually start with the best intentions. For example, in the early days of Google, we know they actually did contribute quite a bit to the open society or back to the community. And some of the projects they shared or released were Chromium. They help with DeepMind, Hadoop, Android, and Google Maps or other suites. But over time, we started noticing a trend across all the major tech companies. And in the graph, you see the usual FANG, the top 5 tech companies in the US. And I tried to summarize in one graph what was the trend that was happening in the last decade. And in the x-axis, you can see the multiplication value of user base times the market cap of each company, while on the y-axis, the ethics or ethical value that those companies hold whenever they think about decision trade-offs. And I guess I tried to convey in this message what was happening, meaning it seemed like the larger the platform grew and the more money they made, the less ethical the decision-making process became. So if this is the real trend that seems inevitable for the future, is there something that we can do to change or shift the course? And there's an old saying large boats steer very slowly. This means hoping for those larger enterprises to change is going to be very hard. So can we do something on the other side, the bottom up? This is what we wanted to introduce, the data unions framework that Streamr is planning to roll out in the next quarter or so, and how they can help developers build more user-centric, maybe open data commons, or even more full decentralized data organizations. Before going into the details, I wanted to give a quick overview of what we mean by data union. On our perspective, is a framework to help developers build user-centric data applications and then to empower those users to get more control over their data. And in this context, framework can be actually interpreted in many ways. It could be pure technology-wise, a full stack of a framework to incentivize developer to develop more decentralized stacks, or more a conceptual design-wise. How can you design something that cannot be evil, from the start, for example, or you roll out a timeline to reach that goal? I think we have heard many data hacks or data abuse, in the news, especially in the last 2 years, or maybe 4, depending how you count it, since 2016 Cambridge Analytica, or even earlier data abuse, all the maybe Dragonfly project from Google, if you ever heard about that, and many others. But one that was very recent and interesting is actually Avast, which is a antivirus software company. They had a scandal because they had a subsidiary, Jumpshot, that actually was using the data they aggregated about users' browsing behavior and repackaged them as products to sell. And Jumpshot was actually making revenue around like anywhere between $20 to $30 million a year. So it was interesting because it put a price tag to what the data value meant on a very straightforward context. And of course, they had to shut down the Jumpshot once the scandal came out because it was for ethical reasons. Then it prompted our community members to think about, is there like an alternative that can still maintain a flowing data economy but reaching like a much more ethical way? And that's what the Swash team did. Swash is actually a browser plugin developed by one of our community members, the developers team, so it's not internal to Streamr, but they build on top of our network, like peer-to-peer network, PubSub, in conjunction with a few other stacks that we will walk you over in the next few slides later. So what the Swash offered was a simple value proposition. Because every platform is already tracking your data, and they are doing that without much consent, or like those like kind of forced consent that you cannot opt out unless you wanna go back to the dark age. Swash implements a more like opt-in, meaning like you can decide what type of data or module you are willing to turn on, like enable, and to what extent you are feeling comfortable. And I think like another change in the paradigm is, as one of my friend Chelsea was saying last night, Swash wants to distribute back value where value is created, meaning that we want to create a more like democratic distribution of the value, not just on the top, but actually where actually users create it. So as I mentioned before, Swash is not just a new paradigm for data aggregation or data sharing, revenue sharing, etc. But it's also much more user-centric, privacy-focused. They allow you to select whatever you feel comfortable, so it's everything like user opt-in and user preference. But more importantly, Swash is the only client side. This means they don't own any server, they don't send any data across their own server, but is leveraging the Streamr peer-to-peer network to push aggregate data. So they're already eliminating one big segment of data abuse, which is like centralized server and centralized silos of data. And to make it even further, more user-centric and user privacy-prone, they actually build on the client side entire data filter layers that users can enable, and advanced topics they can filter out. For example, URL for like personal website content, etc. So to go around, Swash is what we see as the next phase of user-centric and data privacy-prone alternative to allow a more, let's say, ethical-driven data sharing methodology. And how can we sort of guarantee that Swash cannot abuse users' data, right? And this is a quick, diagram or graph to show how it works on the back end of Swash, which is users will leverage Swash to aggregate their data in a anonymous way, and then Swash will push the data across the Streamr peer-to-peer network, which is decentralized with the intention of implementing encryption-based permission granting in the next milestone. That way, the data never touches Swash control server, and all the permissions are controlled via a registry that can easily be on-chain, so it's transparent. And whoever is the other end of this PubSub, aggregate stream, which means could be like one or many, they can simply purchase the stream, unlock the transaction, and the whole flow will be recorded and transparent. So there's no way easily for Swash to cheat in the middle. And to add, I guess, the icing on the cake, Swash code is actually open source. So they cannot even push to a private stream where they control. And whenever the buyers on the other side, purchase the stream for like certain subscription, all the revenue can be forwarded to a smart contract or a DAO, where you can set the specific rules about like value distribution, governance, etc. So we can create actually an end-to-end, more transparent and democratic system of data sharing, and I guess user-centric approach. Now, I'm not sure if you guys seen, like, I read the article about like, Facebook rolling out that study app, which asks user to install and grant root permission so that Facebook team could track even more about what they're already tracking of every user or their study group. So once this article came out, one of our community member developer actually started to think about is there more alternative way to achieve similar results of opening up this data set for app developers, analytical company, like a market study, without having to worry about a central party controlling all those data sets. And this is what brought myDiem to life. It was developed by another team from our community developers, and the whole value proposition of this app is users will be able to share anonymously their app usage statistics, simply the time you use the app or the length you use without sharing the app content itself. This data is fairly anonymous and fairly innocent, but can unlock very powerful insights on the data economy side. And there are many buyers interested, of course, in this data. But instead of doing the Swash approach of a benign team, making sure the ecosystem cannot be cheated or abused, we're actually trying to roll out even a further approach with myDiem, which is running as a data DAO. What does this mean is that we want actually the users that use the app, and in addition to receive the revenue sharing from all the let's say subscriptions from other side from data buyers, we want them to be able in the long term to control also the direction and policy of this app and the ecosystem. But at the same time, we don't want to roll out as the usual traditional DAO, where the value of the DAO, sometimes intrinsic value, is correlated to the DAO involvement, and the involvement is in turn correlated to the value of the DAO. So you create those chicken egg dilemma. We actually want to approach with a simple proposition. We want to start with a simple value that users can understand, which is share your data anonymously in an aggregate and receive revenue for it, revenue sharing, but also you might receive insights about your usage pattern without running the risk of being tracked by a central party. In addition, of course, there are more ethical values of open data commons, or more democratic access to data that other users might follow. But we want to start with you receive something valuable for what you share. And then it'll be very interesting to, with the app ecosystem users to distribute actually, something like a token, reputation tokens in the background without them even knowing at the early stage. But let's say once you reach 10,000, 100,000 users, what happens once you unlock this hidden future or potential to the whole user base? And that's where we want to start. Once the app has a utility for the user, how does the governance look like? And we want to, at that point, roll out onboarding educational information about the governance, and let them test out stage by stage progressive governance participation. And as the stake in the governance increases, because the revenue from the upstream, the data stream increases, we will increase, for example, the requirements for participation, etc., to remove all the worries about how easy to do cyber attack or fake accounts, etc. But there's no reason why we should worry about that in the early stage, because that would just create a huge roadblock in that sense. And this diagram shows actually a quick flow of what data DAO rollout might look like for myDiem, which is users control a DAO based on the a mix of usage and also participation based reputation token, and then they'll be able to elect different administrators for different segments. That could be design, development, business, marketing, and also policy. And also at the same time, they will be able to approve funds for these different segments or departments that themselves can run subgroups of DAO task oriented, for example, on Colony, where you have a participation from the community where the rewards are based on those subtask completion. As I mentioned earlier, how can we make this whole ecosystem data DAO self-sustaining? Is we start with the proposition that this DAO should generate revenue before even the rolling out the DAO itself, and that's what the data aggregation or data union comes from. If the DAO itself has a steady revenue stream, then everything else can trickle down, in a more like a smoother way. And when you have a specific value proposition, and then the users have a reason why they want to participate and why they want to maintain the ecosystem, because the value that goes back to them. And also, another point of I guess friction who come from like who develops the app, and what is the extent of power or control they have over this data DAO. Like, can they actually cheat or scam the users by either hiding some transaction, forwarding transaction data to a personal server, or even like doing some other unethical hacks. They could, but that would be like short-lived, because actually like the DAO managed by the user is the one that controls the permission to the stream. In the sense, like, because the stream is a peer-to-peer and the storage is the peer-to-peer, it can be controlled easily via on-chain registry on who it can grant permission. So actually the data app itself, whether it's myDiem or myDiem version 2, is actually a renter of that permission. So the app can aggregate data and push data stream to that specific aggregated stream, and then create a revenue sharing as long as the DAO grants permission to the app. This means, like, let's say one day the DAO reaches a certain value, and then the app developer decides to do something funny. Well, what the users can do is straightforward. Once you can actually get auditors to audit the apps deployed to make sure they are not having any malicious intent. But once they figure out they were malicious intent, they can simply shut down the access to the aggregate stream to the app. So the app cannot do anything anymore to that point. And they're not stealing value from the DAO, because the storage and the stream is where the value is being created. The app is just like a means to end. At that point, another app can come up, especially if the app is open source, or like, the design is well known to the community. They can simply, nominate another administrator in the app development team, etc., to take over the new stream, I guess, permission, and move on from there, just like it never happened before. And there's no value stealing in this sense, because the app, the new app, actually builds on top of the old stream aggregated that was generated with the previous app. So as you can see, I highlighted here where actually is the value, and the value resides in the aggregated stream, which is controlled by the DAO, and the DAO is, over time run by the users. Of course, there are many attack vectors that you may think, like, what about SIBO attack, and the other vectors. And that's why I put earlier, like, the rollout structure. I mean, like, there's not really value in attacking the, let's say, this data DAO early on, because there's not much DAO value itself embedded into it. As the user base grow, the value will be accrued over time, but at the same time, participation requirement might increase over time. So, creating like, you have those like data farm, for example, that can run like, many users, but at the same time, does that value of running, the cost of running those, fake users, match with the value that we'll get out of it? Because the DAO elects administrators that need to propose actual functional, I guess, milestone and work projects that means there's a lot of work actually behind it, and to just simply hack. But at the same time, all this like looks very promising, and as I mentioned before, Swash is already out in the beta testing, and we had 1,000 users already testing the environment, experimenting with the DAO. Data, aggregation, value, exchange, etc. myDiem is going probably roll out in the next quarter or so, and the goal is actually to expand, whatever crypto adoption ecosystem to the larger community. We are trying to reach those users that no airdrop can reach. So, the traditional token distribution is never going to touch them. So, the goal can be, of course. Broadly speaking, what happens if we onboard 100,000 or million users from the traditional Web2 ecosystem, And then they suddenly realize they have a data token or a token available, and then say, what am I going to do with that? And there's nothing that pushes more curiosity than having something valuable that you're willing to trade off. At the same time, to reach this goal wasn't a hard journey, wasn't an easy journey. As this funny meme says, one does not simply build a data DAO, especially not out of the blue. And I want to quickly walk over some of the layer stacks or ecosystem components. Okay, that this data union framework is composed of. You have the network layer that takes care of the data transfer, and the storage is peer-to-peer. We get more and more decentralized over time. And the next milestone, we are rolling out, for example, the encryption permission granting scheme. And also, once you have this data aggregation, then you need a marketplace to discover those data streams, and also a payment, of course, system, which we're leveraging Ethereum. So Streamr network, as I mentioned before, is a peer-to-peer pub-sub real-time network, and is almost perfect for those data aggregations, where you can aggregate 100,000 or million of data user streams into a single one. And from a developer perspective, you just fire and forget, meaning you don't need to care about how many subscribers on the other side are, because the network will take care of them. You just fire your data into a single stream, and then the network will distribute via the permission granting and the whole purchase flow that's automated on chain. In the Streamr Marketplace is an example deployment where developers can actually publish their data for free, for fee, or other whitelist or blacklist. There are many flavors. You can even deploy your own marketplace on top of Streamr if you want to run a niche market or your subgroup. And for the micropayment, we actually roll out what is called a Microplasma, which is a one-to-many micropayment distribution. Because, as I mentioned before, behind a data union or a data DAO, there could be 100,000 users or million users, right? So whenever a subscriber or data buyer pays for that stream, you need to have a way efficiently to distribute this revenue across users. And this is what we did with Monoplasma. We had to cut down some of the trade-off, which makes this very user-specific for Streamr. And this is a quick overview of what a centralized data application looks like compared to data DAO framework, which is you can roll out everything with the existing infrastructure. This means you can have a data app that never needs a server by itself. So you can cut down so much maintenance headache, but also security and other issues that would be impossible nowadays. So if you are interested in any of those spaces, we would love for you to reach out, because the interesting and intriguing thing about the data union framework is it touches upon many components, from data application building to data union management to DAO governance, from federated learning. So how can you, for example, create a common machine learning that is privacy-centric, because we have a way to aggregate user data, right, on their own storage, for example. And that's where, decentralized storage becomes a big play. And of course, ethical advertising and zero knowledge are very big use cases. So that's it. Thank you for listening. If you are interested, please do reach out, follow us on Twitter. We have Reddit, visit our website for more information, and my Telegram, Twitter is the same handle if you want to chat. Thank you very much.